Okay, so just a couple more little tips and tricks before you get kind of into things that involve keyframing and all that kind of stuff, and getting into more advanced sort of effects and edits. So the couple little tricks I always like to teach people to help them kind of organize their stuff is this idea that we call nesting in these kinds of video and animation projects and programs. So basically, the idea would be sometimes it's just so hard. You get something, a whole bunch of like pieces and parts of something working, but it's got like like a million little chunks and edits and things like that on your timeline, and it would be really hard to then add more on top of it, if that makes any sense. So you have a really complicated thing like right now you can see that the name of this sequence is the goon walk sequence, right? So that's the sequence that I have here. And it's, let's say it got even more complicated in this really isn't that big a deal, but let's just pretend like it is. And I might want to just add this goon walk part into something else, and I kind of want to keep it cleaner and simpler. What you can remember is that these little icons tell you these are little actual like pieces of footage. It's just footage. These little ones with a little timeline and the 3 bars are like a sequence, and so that's like a grouping of edits you've already made. So what I could do is just go up here to go to File, New, and then instead of making a new project, which I don't want, I just want a new sequence. So that's going to give me like a blank sequence. I can kind of pick from all these different kinds of settings. I always tell people just stick with basic HD stuff at the beginning unless you really know what you're doing. Like, if you wanted to go with this, you could. It's really like, again, I suspect that just simple 1080p is going to be enough for most of the things that we're doing as beginners. So once you get it all done, you just click OK on that, right? And now it's just a blank timeline, right? And so, let's say I wanted to drag something in there like, another piece of footage, and I'm going to drop it in. You can either change the sequence settings to match, or you can keep your existing settings. It's up to you. Doesn't really change a whole lot of anything. But let's say I have this footage, and then I wanted to add what I was doing in my that whole sequence of goon walk stuff. So I could just take this whole sequence up here in the project panel. I can just drag it down and just drop it in, right? And if I do that, you'll see that now, like all of the things that I had done in that beginning, in the actual sequence itself, are now they're contained in this one little tiny, like, they're just all right here in this one kind of green sequence. So all of that complicated stuff, it just becomes one line on your timeline, which is often really helpful for me. So the cool thing about this, though, is like, let's say I'm working along here, and I could do something like, let's say I'm changing the opacity so that they kind of interact with one another in some way. And but I'm like, oh, I don't quite like where this happens, right? Where I can always, since this is nested, so I've placed this sequence in here, I can just double click this. It's going to open up that old sequence that I had made, right? I can grab one of these tools, like maybe I'll grab the ripple edit tool, and if I click and drag this whole thing back a little ways, you see how it pulls all of that footage back with it since it's a ripple edit, and then it's automatically updated into this other sequence that I just created. So all of that stuff that I just changed now shows up here. So it can be a lot easier to kind of just work on smaller sequences that you're kind of layering in or editing together if there's a lot of complicated effects or anything like that. It's just called nesting, where I'm nesting one thing inside of another thing. But I can always go back and edit the original nested thing. I can just, again, double click it or open it up from the project palette up there and then make changes, right? So if I wanted to go in here and like make an effect, I could add that, and then it'll just auto update into the sequence that it's nested inside of. So it's really cool, really neat way to kind of organize your stuff. You'll use it quite a bit if you do a lot of complicated things in like After Effects or any other these other programs. So just go for it, give it a try. Try to remember that, like, the cleaner you can kind of keep your editing, and like the more organized you are, the less likely it is that you're going to mess something up and not be able to figure out what happened or where it went or where it came from. So try to use like some good sort of naming conventions. Like I wouldn't go with sequence 3 here. I'd probably control click on that, right? And then I can go down here to rename, and I would call it something like, since they're combined, right? It just helps me remember stuff. because I'm very easily forgetful. So, so go for it. See what you can do. Try out some nesting stuff and see if you can make it work.